Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about what sort of macros we should be aiming for as a general rule for optimal body composition and muscle growth. Okay, so this really isn't that complicated, and this is something I think people need to think about. We need to be thinking about how much protein do we need to maximize muscle growth or to maintain muscle mass when we're losing fat if we're in a deficit. And we need to be thinking in terms of what fats do we need for optimal health, insulin sensitivity, vitamin absorption, all that. Okay, and outside of that, I want to be clear. It makes sense to fill the vast majority of your calories with carbohydrates beyond that. And in fact, you're going to gain muscle easier if you do so because of all the anabolic signaling, the insulin response, everything else. But let me briefly explain why that is. So for protein intake, the data is pretty conclusive. This has been studied over and over and over and over. We have tons of meta-analysis, and this is looking at, a lot of these analyses are looking at Olympic lifters, power lifters, competitive bodybuilders. So the people who you would think of who really we care the most about optimizing protein intake has shown consistently that the muscle growth caps at around 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And that's of mixed source protein. Now, some people are like, but some studies show lower. Well, yeah, because if they use really high quality proteins, you can get away with less. What do we mean? Something like whey or egg whites or whatever. But even if you're mostly plant-based or slightly lower bioavailability proteins, that is your upper threshold. Now, am I saying there are no metabolic benefits? Or there can't be some benefits to protein overfeeding beyond this? No, I'm saying that can be helpful in some situations. I think particularly when you're trying to force feed protein for fat loss, protein overfeeding, there can be something to that. But if we're just pursuing optimal body composition, particularly maximizing muscle growth, the data is pretty consistent. So how much protein is that? For me, I go up to as high as 100 kilos, but normally I float around, 96, 97, whatever. So let's just call it 100. That's 150 grams of protein. Now, some studies have taken it up to 1.6. So what is that, a 160? Anything beyond that's just really calories, possible burn stuff through thermic effect. This again, that's the upper threshold. All right, what about fat intake? All right, the only fats we care about are polyunsaturated fats. And we need to be clear here. There are no essential saturated or monounsaturated fats. Okay? So when people start saying, well, we need a certain amount of saturated fat, or we need, no. And I'm not saying there aren't some health benefits to monounsaturated fats. I'm not saying there aren't some things associated with them oftentimes in those foods that are beneficial. But as far as the body having a need for it, it's just simply not true. Your body can make all of those. So in other words, like adding saturated fat to your diet beyond the calories has no benefit. It's just calories at that point. Like your body can make saturated fat out of other fats just fine. In fact, the human body is very good at making saturated fat. Okay, what do you think most of our body fat is? In fact, saturated fat gets stored as body fat slightly more efficiently than other fats. It just does. It also can reduce insulin sensitivity. Okay, so if we're coming back over to maximizing body composition, we're not trying to add saturated fat unless you need it to get the calories you need. And again, there are people who do need to do that. I'm not saying they don't exist. It's a reason drinking a gallon of milk a day has worked for many hard gainers. I'm not saying it doesn't. But are we trying to maximize body composition? Well, we don't need to be adding calories that doesn't help contribute to muscle growth in some way. Either directly training fuel, which would be almost entirely carbohydrates, reducing inflammation, improving insulin sensitivity. All right, polyunsaturated fats have been shown to improve insulin sensitivity and lower inflammation the most, and that includes omega-6. And we need approximately, for optimal health, we seem to need around, and this is subject to a huge amount of debate, by the way. Huge amount of debate in the research because we don't have these numbers. I've seen it suggested that maybe around 20 grams, 15 to 20 total grams, or close to 20 of polyunsaturated fats. Now, that might seem like a small amount to you realize that might be 40 or 50 grams of fat in your diet to even get it. And that's if you're picking sources high in it. I mean, sources that are high in these are maybe 40 to 50% polyunsaturated. Again, I use a lot of tofu for that right now. Okay, perfect example. All right. So beyond those two things, if, and I want to be very clear, if our goal is maximizing body composition, it does make sense to largely fill the rest with carbohydrates, particularly non-junk carbs. I'm not telling you to eat refined fructose, which is any form of refined sugar, table sugar, hydrotose corn syrup, even honey. Those are all refined fructose. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about mostly whole foods. If you have the appetite to get the fiber in, otherwise white rice or whatever is fine. But again, largely whole foods. If our goal is maximizing body composition, why? Well, the thermic effect, the better insulin sensitivity. So here's the thing that we have to think about. Insulin is extremely anabolic to muscle tissue. We should be eating foods that have a large insulinogenic response. However, we also need to be eating foods that improve insulin sensitivity in our muscle tissue the most, so that we get the most anabolic effect from that insulin, even when we produce less of it. Right, and if we have a higher insulin sensitivity, we produce less total, but still get the anabolic effect. So even though we're eating very insulinogenic foods, that really is just feeding muscle tissue. Also, you have to think about the thermic effect. When you eat very low fat, and then you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, your body is not going to store those carbohydrates as fat. It burns them off as heat, but we're also getting the extra calories with the insulinogenic response and the anabolic drive and anabolic signaling from that. Okay? It makes a lot of sense in that context to do so. So as far as macros for fat, there is no fat macro. If you're trying to get maybe 15 to 20 grams of polyunsaturated fats, that's the fat macros you count. So you can look at your foods. You're going to have to look at individual foods and see what's in them. And any fat beyond that is basically just kind of your filler calories. And you need to think of it as that, because you kind of have to do it to even get those foods in, to get the foods with the fats you need. But you also need to remember that particularly the saturated fat, can negatively affect what you were pursuing in terms of body composition, purely due to the potential loss of insulin sensitivity. So again, there's our context. Same thing with protein. Protein beyond that, we're getting a very similar effect to what we're getting from carbohydrate, just with a possibly slightly higher thermic effect. So again, it's not necessarily the most efficient, it just costs more money. And again, I'm not saying if you prefer more protein in your diet, you can't do it that way. There will probably be very, very little difference. It's just that it may cost more, and for some people it will be even harder to eat. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.